Good afternoon and good morning to our overseas panelists. Perhaps we have some in the audience also overseas, so it will be morning by you. My name is Anneli Sjölander Lindqvist, and I will guide you through this panel. This is the sixth seminar of the Just Tour project, and we will talk about responses to contestations of touristification. We have 5 exciting talks to take part of today. And this seminar, the 6 panelists will talk about the various ways residents respond to the rapidly evolving phenomenon of touristification. And we will hear about diverse mediums, such as protests, street art, communal gatherings, satirical tourist brochures and posters, etc., in varying spatial contexts across the world, in order to consider and discuss the affordances, capacities, and motivations that inform resident engagement with and their responses to touristification, as well as the effect of such mediums in their spatial context. Each speaker will have around 10 minutes to their disposal. If there's time, I will ask a short question to the speaker. And if not, we will just move on to the next one. When we have listened to our 5 panelists, our 5 speakers, there will be a Q&A session for around 10 minutes. And after that, we will wrap up and have some closing remarks. And we will finish at latest by 5:30, sorry. I'm happy to introduce to the screen our first speaker, which is Alejandro Armas Diaz, who will talk about struggles against touristification and nature appropriation in Tenerife. Alejandro is an associate professor at the Department of Geography and History at the Universidad de La Laguna in the Canary Islands in Spain. His main line of research is the production of urban space and city government policies, studying their effects on public open spaces and housing. He currently explores the production of non-exclusively urban space, focusing on struggles for the right to the island and natures. His work has addressed some of these processes in the Canary Islands, Southern Europe, Central Europe, and Latin America. Welcome to the screen.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks to the audience, to Anna de Jong, to Anne, to the colleagues of the University of Glasgow for the invitation and the organization of the Just Tour seminar series. So I'm Ali Armas, and today I will present shortly an ongoing collaborative research on touristification and natural appropriation in the island of Tenerife at the Canary Islands. So, first of all, well, tourism in the Canary Islands is an industry that grew rapidly from the 1960s onwards. Since then, it has undergone various crises and transformation to expand into new fronts of accumulation. It is well known that this activity is responsible for a significant proportion of carbon emissions into the atmosphere and has become the main pollution industry in the region, specialized in tourism, such as the Canary Islands, where it accounts for around 80% of carbon emissions. Within this framework, the climate crisis has become a powerful pretext for tourism after the COVID-19 crisis to continue expanding without moving away from mass tourism, but targeting responsible tourist elitists occupying areas previously less or not touristified, emphasizing decarbonization, promoting biodiversity, and so on. And also to retain its hegemonic and unquestionable role in the regional economy. The year 2025 was designated as the year of the crab due to the rollback of environmental policies and the scaling back of efforts to combat climate change. This ideological shift suggests shifting the focus of climate policy toward carbon capture and offsets, that is, the trading of greenhouse gases, rather than reducing the emission of such substances. We understand capitalism as a way of organizing nature, as Jason Moore suggested. But we also expand this idea drawing on Neil Smith's work on green capitalism and the insertion of non-human nature as an accumulation strategy, and also on Noel Castri's discussions on the commodification of nature, who identifies several elements such as abstraction, individuation, quantification, privatization, and so on. Drawing on an analysis of regulations, press coverage, interviews, and participant observation, as well as paradigmatic case studies that illustrate well these trends, we explore mitigation and green grabbing strategies employed by the public authorities to ensure the continuity of tourism in the island of Tenerife. While nature plays a fundamental role in the accumulation of capital, it is not less true that the struggle to prevent its destruction and degradation constitutes a powerful source of opposition and inspiration for future alternatives. The right to nature emerges in opposition to neoliberal ways of conservation. Empirical evidence shows that communities in island territories have distinctive characteristics. We highlight how islands exhibit the greater awareness of limits than continental. The idea of right to the island sheds some light on the production of insular scales and socio-natures under a regime of tourism extractivism. The combination of touristification and the commodification of nature without precedent has led to unrest, frustration, and massive protest among the local population. Nature is inserted in at least two ways. First, through a redefinition of the environment and sustainability as problematic, scarce, or abundant, while simultaneously embedded with an ideology. Second, through the development of various laws and acts. Some of these were initiated in the 90s to attract high-income tourism, and trend reinforced in the 2000s and more recently through the law on tourist rentals, on short-term rentals in the Canary Islands. Other regulations and instruments also shaped the environment and adapted to that ideology. As numerous scholars point out, neoliberalism requires no fewer rules and regulation, but rather greater intervention from the state to lay the groundwork for a concrete program aligned with its goals. Green and decarbonization pretexts seem to hold even greater relevance on the political agenda, which suggests that by mid-century the Canary Islands should reduce CO2 emissions and become a major carbon sink not only for regional tourism activity, but also for global activities. This regulation also poses a risk, as they imply that funding is channeled based on ecosystem value. As example, CO2 absorption, attribute to that forest by the administration. This results in the assignment of values to non-human nature. Some are deemed more useful and receive greater economic resources for their maintenance, but while others are considered less useful to society and underfunded. There are 4 cases that particularly illustrate these trends and unrest: Puertito de Adeje in the south of Tenerife, La Tejita, Punta Blanca, and El Rincón, where protests have not yet reached a large scale. Here we have some points which are applied to this kind of green grabbing and ungreen grabbing in each of these cases. No, we don't have too much time to go to in detail to each of these cases, but we can point some of the trends in the next slide. These 4 cases, reveal efforts to reincorporate nature, whether through species conservation of carbon offsettings, more extensively to sustain former and foster new forms of extractive tourism. The cases of La Tejita, El Puertito de Adeje, and Punta Blanca, with underwater gardens, a thematic park, with their environmentalistic rhetoric, illustrate how nature continues to be a central element in driving capital accumulation, even more than in the past. The case of El Rincón illustrates a new frontier in which the touristification and commodification of nature also relied on green arguments in a context where other types of tourism initiatives beyond vacation rentals would not be possible, at least for now. It is no coincidence that the most recent and largest protests on the island have centered on 3 of these projects under consideration. Sorry, 4 of them. La Tejita, El Puertito de Adeje, and Punta Blanca with underwater gardens. Protests symbolize the public's discontent with the island development model and reflect a kind of right to the island, a right to its unique natural environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandro, for this. This is really exciting to hear your research on this. One short question to you that came to my mind listening to your talk is that how is these protests understood, or are these protests kind of visible to the tourists? Are they present in kind of like in the eyes of the tourists?
Oh, well, I think so. Well, because there are a lot of media coverage about the protest. No, I know that the Guardian in Great Britain, they were here and they were interviewing people and protesters and activists about this kind of protest. But also other, I don't know, CNN and other medias were really covering these protest movements here. No, we have one of the biggest protests in the Canary Islands, and 20 April 2024. Sorry, yeah. And I think many tourists, they come and they try to have another kind of behavior because of the kind of protest, no?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to our next speaker, which is Eyes on Gotland, which is a co-founded non-profit association on the island of Gotland in Sweden. We have on the screen, we have Pia and Helena. Pia Ingelse, who is a visual artist based in Visby. Visby is, for those who doesn't know, the main urban center or an urban town on Visby. She is born and raised on Gotland. She has witnessed firsthand how tourism has transformed the small island over time. Living in a rented apartment within the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Visby's town center, her daily life and environment are significantly impacted by tourism. On the screen is also Helena Blom, who is an architect with a postmaster status in architecture, critical habitat, with a focus on the change in housing that is happening in many places globally, and how the local population is being pushed out for a new economy. She moved to Visby and Gotland in 2002 and has lived in the center of the Visby town for 24 years. So Eyes on Gotland, Ögonen på Gotland in Swedish, addresses the challenges facing Gotland due to tourism. Visby is in a negative spiral where the population lacks places and housing that is instead converted for tourism and short-term rentals. Eyes on Gotland works to create discussion and raise awareness among the population about the problems that exist and what is happening as tourism and change is increasing. Welcome on the screen, Pia and Helena.
Thank you. We're very glad to be here and very glad to meet other people who are struggling with this topic.
Yes. Visby is a small town. It's about 26,000 inhabitants. And we have a center that is the old town. And it's a medieval town that is one of the best preserved medieval Hanseatic cities in the Scandinavia. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage. It's a very vibrant city with schools, services, shops and restaurants. Over the past 15 years, the numbers of residents has decreased from 60 to 30%, and fewer can live permanently in the inner old city. It is now classified by the Statistics Sweden as a holiday home area and may lose its UNESCO distinction. And we are also one of Sweden's most attractive tourist destinations during the summer, when it's warm and close to the beaches, nightclubs, etc. So it's a very compressed period when everything will happen. In Sweden, we have only like 8 weeks holiday period when it's warm, and the rest of the year it is very cold and empty, so it's difficult to get tourist business going on all the year around, which make our place very special, I think. It's and we have the last 10 years real estate owner who is buying every large and small building that comes out on the market. He currently owns more than 66 houses, and all the biggest houses with all the activities like restaurants and shops. So everybody is very... Yeah, we are not very good in English.
Yes, we are. Depending.
Yeah, we are very depending on him. Yes. And so
where are you in the text?
This man becomes the elephant in the room, as we are a place where everyone knows everyone. So it's difficult for us to question without becoming personally uncomfortable. The buildings are being converted into hotels, renovated and becoming much more expensive. Front companies from Stockholm are all getting leases and using the apartments that were previously our homes for short-term rentals. Neither residents nor companies can afford the rents. The city feels increasingly empty. We also have problems with external investors who buy properties to park their capital and spend very little on their homes. These also drive up the price of houses and apartments to a level that is completely unreasonable for us permanent islanders.
Yes. Ögonen på Gotland in Swedish. The Eyes on Gotland is a non-profit association. We're mainly creative people in our group. We are artists and art directors, architects and designers. We have had meetings and gathers others who are committed to the issue surrounding Visby's negative development. We have various open seminars and raise issues such as noise, housing, infrastructure and planning, etc. We use our big eyes that we made ourselves, showing up sometimes to start discussion. For example, we have had actions where we stuck small posters on poles all over the town about information that this is now a holiday home area and park your capital here. We also had stickers said with info about what happens when too many homes become hotels. We have also cruise tourism here on Gotland in Visby, and it's a great impact. It's like Venice or more, that this huge boat came and we're only, how many are we in Visby? We are like 2,000, but there are like 10,000 people getting off the boat. I was going to say, yes. About 10,000 visitors a day during May to September. We are fewer than 2,000 people living in the city, so it becomes completely full of visitors who don't really give much back to the island. The city becomes overcrowded with guests who go in large groups. We have also had meeting with our politicians on the island from the largest party, the Social Democrats, to bring up these about these changes, but they don't see how they can change the situation based on our laws in Sweden. They are aware that it's a problem, not only in Visby, but on the entire island. But perhaps we should not reinvest much of our budget in the tourist industry, but work activity too. We have some suggestions here. Create rental apartments for permanent residents that are owned by the municipality. Work so that other industries can grow and provide jobs for all those who not have full-time employment. Change the attitudes of municipal officials. We feel that we are the problem. Work more seriously with supervision of noise problems, etc. during the summer, and support cultural life outside the summer months. Yes, this is what we have wrote that we would like to bring up. So, yes.
We'd like to show how our eyes work.
This is the eyes. So, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Pia and Helena. Great to hear about your experience of living on Gotland. Would you say that how far spread? How do you reach out to the inhabitants of Visby? How is the response by your neighbors, by people who live in Visby, both inside the mural and outside? Do you meet kind of like, are people understanding of your protests?
It's a kind of infected and really like there is an elephant in the room, because you get really bold when you talk about these problems. I think this is happening all over Europe, or when you bring up the topics, it's really because they think that the tourist is making so much money for Gotland. So it's a kind of, some are with us, but there are also people that think we're so destroying to do this.
Yes, they are very afraid we are going to destroy the summer for the other.
Yeah. So it definitely is kind of like a tense situation in this sense.
And the tense is also that I'm an artist and the island is really small. So my name is, people know who I am. So, and my husband's son is having restaurants. So, if you speak up, it's they know who I am. So it can be a bit difficult. Yeah. Also, Elena, who is working here with a lot of people, and we are connected to so many people. It's a bit difficult.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Eyes on Gotland, for this. Let's move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Guillem Colom Montero from Mallorca. Here he is on the screen. Welcome.
Hello.
Okay. So Guillaume will talk about his speeches on response to over-tourism in Mallorca, from culture trauma to hyper-object. Guillaume is a senior lecturer in Hispanic Studies at the University of Glasgow and co-director of the research lab Discourses of Sustainability. His work examines how communities articulate place, identity, and political agency through cultural expression and grassroots activism. Drawing on post-colonial and decolonial studies, trauma theory, environmental humanities, and critical mobilities. His current project analyzes cultural representations of unsustainable tourism emerging from local communities in Spain and across Europe. He has published several articles and book chapters on tourism in Spain. Guillaume has also published extensively on Catalan studies, including the monograph Quim Monzó and Contemporary Catalan Culture. Please, screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Annelie, for introduction, and thank you to the Gesture team for the invitation. It's actually great being here today, and I really enjoyed the two previous presentations, one more academic, another one more artistic, because that's what I want to bring together here, talking about the island of Mallorca, which many will know is a mass tourism destination since the 1950s in the Mediterranean. So what I want to show today is a few examples of the cultural responses that have emerged in the last 10 to 50 years in response to the pressures of over-tourism on the island. And I want to show the strong interactions between culture and activism. As a matter of fact, the four images you see on the screen are activism, and also the relevance of island speciality. And this connects very well with Alejandro and with the previous presentation by Pia and Helena, because Mallorca, while it's a much bigger island, it actually also has that tradition of island and the relevance of getting to know or knowing everyone on the island. I will also develop two critical interventions, bringing environmental humanities into tourism, and thus reframing tourism as part of the climate crisis discourse. So basically, in 2019, I published the article Mass Tourism as Cultural Trauma, in which I was analyzing two comics, mostly, I was analyzing several cult products, but mostly two comics published in 2014 and 2018. This one is entitled, most of this production is in the Catalan language, which is the local language in Mallorca. It's entitled The Last Days of the Mallorcan Empire, and the second one, published in 2018, Hell in Mallorca, The Decadence of the Mallorcan Empire. So these comics, as other cultural products, rehistoricize the effects of mass tourism from the 1950s up to the late 2010s as culturally traumatic. Tourism, as I showed in the article, was presented as the trigger of a sudden, comprehensive, unexpected, and polarizing episode of socio-environmental transformation. And in this, the fact that Mallorca is an island plays a key role, precisely because islands tend to bring together the actual community, the lived landscapes, and the cultural identity, thus creating emotional geographies of place that are very affected in the case in Mallorca. These comics were highly influential on the island. There were articles in the press and it is very interesting that the main image that was reproduced on the article was not the front cover, but this one, which is from the second comic. As you can see, it says Hell in Mallorca and Broom, where the island is fully occupied by tourism-oriented development. I have developed this argument of tourism as the trigger of cultural trauma in various publications published in the last few years, in which the cultural trauma, I frame the cultural trauma as part of the environmental discourses of trauma. So it is this critique is also, of course, a critique of tourism, but it also needs to be integrated within the environmental critique of tourism and beyond. In that sense, these communities, this cultural creation, tend to frame natural ecosystem and cultural landscape as mutually interdependent, and tourism is represented through narrative and discourses of invasion, displacement, destruction, and erasure. This is also seen in visual culture and activism. Totin Close is an anarchist collective that appeared in 2014 to criticize the impacts of tourism on the island. Tot Inclòs is the Catalan version of All Included. And as you can see, the first one is from the summer of 2014, 16, 17, etc. So this was published for around 5 years. As you can see, the front covers represent the island literally being invaded, destroyed, or the locals holding the tourism industry literally with their hands. Nevertheless, that island speciality is also a bit complex because it triggers an otherness, an alterity that is a bit problematic. We can see it here, how there are some discourses that are a bit complex in that sense that I feel this needs to be mentioned. Nevertheless, there are also other ones that are a bit more self-critical. For instance, this one, also from Tot Inclòs, represents a Mallorcan male dressed in the traditional rural attire and with a sunscreen that is actually killing him. This reads as ara guiri. Guiri is a key term in Spain because it's the term used to refer to foreign tourists. It's a very culturally embedded term, part of the everyday conversation. So as you can say, it plays with the notion of ara kiri and ara giri in the sense that Mallorcans also bear a historical responsibility for the effects of tourism on the island. This alternative between the locals and tourists, nevertheless, can also be very creative, very constructive. So in the summer of 2023, Canamunt is one of the most over-touristified and gentrified neighborhoods in Palma de Mallorca's old town. And the local neighborhood association is very active and has for the last few years been organizing the local festivities in the summer in ways that criticize tourism, but also create a sense of community in the sense that forms of protest then turn into festive celebrations of community bonding. The 2023 one, the 2023 one campaign was actually also very widely mentioned in the press. I actually spoke to the organizers and they were shocked because, as you can see, it says Canamunt underground, els parkings seran sempre nostres, car parking spaces will be ours forever. So the notion here is that locals have to shield both from overcrowding, from over-tourism, but also from the climate emergency. And then this is actually part of the local communities, and the posters are very creative. I will read the translation from the Catalan. As you can see, they say, we bump into friends and acquaintances every day, so different from upstairs life. Or this one, which refers, it says actually, queuing to arrive to the beach is overrated. And it's playing with the notion that in the summer of 2022, there were beaches in Mallorca in which you had to queue. Tourists were queuing, and that for the local wasn't heard of. The next one says, I don't have a flat, but I don't need to leave the neighborhood any longer, because of course the neighborhood is the car parking place. This place with the actually locals being priced out by non-residents. And the last one, which I really like, actually reads, neither sunscreen nor melanoma, in the notion that since they are not going to the beach, they do not need the sunscreen, but they are not going to be affected by the climate crisis. This all shows the relevance of tourism in cultural creation and activism. But something that I would like to point out as well is the critique of the notion of sustainable tourism. We can see this political cartoon. It is published in Mallorca's most important daily newspaper. You can see the cathedral, which is one of the most important tourism spots, and someone saying, oh, please, we need sustainable tourism. It's, of course, a critique of the notion of sustainable tourism. And we can see here the notion of sustainable tourism represented as a unicorn. Bringing together all of these narratives in my recent research, what I'm actually aiming, or what I have theorized, is how the impacts of tourism are presented as catastrophic, leading to a collapse. A very well-known singer-songwriter has presented a song entitled Mallorca s'enfonsa, which translated from the Catalan means Mallorca is drowning. And again, another political cartoon represents the island as drowning. And one of the pilots say, is it the rising sea levels And another one, no, it's overpopulation, overcrowding. So given these narratives of apocalypse, of collapse, for instance, we go back to the summer of 2024 protest, in which after the main demonstration on the island of Mallorca, another regional newspaper entitled Mallorca to the Limit, and the image they show is a young woman here holding a placard which says, no es turismophobia as Mallorca city. Is not tourism phobia, is Mallorquicide. Therefore, playing with the word like femicide, genocide, the disappearance of the historically established community. And in that sense, in my most recent research, what I'm aiming to theorize is that tourism is becoming a hyper object on the island. It is so extensive, both spatially and temporally, and it is so ever present that locals are experiencing tourism as a hyper object. So that's the article that will hopefully be out next year. So yeah, this is my most recent research on over-tourism, and also showing the strong links between culture and activism on the island. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guillaume, for this. Yes, I think for Europeans at least, and definitely for us who from Sweden, Mallorca is a very special place, since this is the start of the traveling, European traveling. Yeah. So I had a question regarding the comics, the comics. Would you say that are these primarily kind of inward facing for residents or outward facing, or are they more intended for tourists, or is it a combination, or a way to also raise kind of awareness among tourists coming to the island?
Yeah. No, the comics are actually addressed to the local population. The comics are written actually in the Mallorcan dialect of Catalan, so it is really a local product. Nevertheless, they combine English and German as well. It is a trend in this cultural production that there is always a combination of languages. The comics are basically aimed at the local population in that sense. So a lot of the work by activists is actually also kind of aiming to explain the situation to tourists, but also part of the cultural production tend to speak to the locals. And that's a bit of an issue because it links to that otherness and alterity that I was talking about. And for instance, there was another activist group that actually launched a bilingual sarcastic tourism guide in which it said one thing for the locals and another in English for tourists. And of course, the things were very different. So that was very interesting, very creative, but also very problematic in finding solutions or shared narratives in that sense. It creates an alterity between the locals and the tourists that I sometimes find problematic, because I feel there should also be more focus on the class divisions among locals, because there are deep class divisions. So while the island speciality is very powerful to build the critique of tourism, it is also concealing some local class divisions.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We will return to these issues in the Q&A session, but now it's time for next speaker, and that is Hukulane Aikau from Hawaii, who will talk about narrating detours as a decolonial guidebook. Dr. Aikau is a Kanaka o Iwi, I hope I pronounced that right, a native Hawaiian, interdisciplinary scholar with research expertise in indigenous planetary health, indigenous land-based learning, and indigenous feminist theory. For more than a decade, Dr. Aikau has worked with a native Hawaiian nonprofit organization working to restore land-based food systems, which has invited her to attend to the ways heteropatriarchy has become sedimented in indigenous communities. She's also part of an international research group that examines the politics and possibilities of indigenous internationalism and indigenous resurgence for planetary health. Finally, Dr. Aikau has co-edited Detours, a Decolonial Guide to Hawaii with Bernadette Gonzalez, published by Duke University Press in 2019. And with Gonzalez, she also co-edits the Detours, the Decolonial Guide series, also at Duke University Press. Welcome. The screen is yours.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who made this panel possible. In many ways, my presentation today could have featured a lot of the similar kinds of thematics that we've already heard from the other presenters, but I'll be focusing specifically on the Detours book, the Decolonial Guide to Hawaii, and the work that we are trying to do with the book as a kind of repository for all of the kinds of possibilities and alternatives to tourism. So my presentation today won't focus so much on the critique of tourism and how tourism impacts Hawaii, but rather focusing on how the book works to curate these otherwise possibilities for Hawaii's future that don't rely on tourism or U.S. militarism, which is the other major factor that impacts our communities in Hawaii. So that will be my presentation today. So when we're thinking about Hawaii and what we wanted to do with this book, we really had two objectives. The first was that we the editors and the contributors really set out to challenge the dominant imaginary about Hawaii as a tourist destination. And in this regard, the book is a critique of tourism, militarism, and colonialism in Hawaii. We begin by thinking about the guidebook itself as an example of how this imaginary is produced and reproduced over and over again, such that the Hawaii is really primarily understood as a tropical vacation, the exotic at home, a fantasy island. And in Hawaii, as with other tourist destinations, as we've heard today, this desire and imaginary are extractive. It's all about the tourist experience and what they can purchase and then take home with them at the end of their visit. For us, we initially turned to the guidebook, the form and function of the guidebook, to perhaps, and tried to pervert it a little bit, to try to do something different with it. But the guidebook itself as a form reproduces this tourist imaginary by tapping into the titillation of the exotic other. And we initially, again, tried to work with that form. But as we started to work with our contributors, we realized that the form was too narrow. It was too prescriptive. We found the genre, form, and conventions to be too fixed, to pervert. And the audience is specifically for the guidebook tourists. And we wanted our audience to be much broader than that. As we also just heard, local, whether they be Native Hawaiian or other residents of Hawaii, are also being inundated and inculcated into this dominant imaginary, either in the education system, the public school system, or even because of people having to work within the industry. So we broadened our focus to go beyond the guidebook. We shifted from focusing on a guidebook to thinking about how the essays, that art, maps, etc., that we feature in our book could offer an otherwise to the tourism and militarism industry. And we started to ask different kinds of questions. The first is, how do we frame this alternative encounter with Hawaii as something worth engaging in? How do we create through these essays, art, poetry, etc., a desire for folks to want to understand Hawaii through a different lens, through a different set of questions? How do we also present the history of Hawaii as a sovereign indigenous place differently? How do we not commodify Hawaiian culture, but rather embrace Hawaiian culture, history, and politics as a mobilizing factor to, again, vision alternative futures for Hawaii? And then finally, how do we balance writing about place in loving detail with aloha without it being an open invitation. The tourism industry has co-opted the concept of aloha, the aloha spirit, and sold it to tourists as a commodity that they can purchase and that is available to them everywhere. This aloha spirit serves as an open invitation to tourists who feel a sense of ownership and entitlement to all places everywhere in Hawaii. And we wanted to resist that while also holding on to a very Hawaiian sense of aloha, which is about generosity and reciprocity. So these were the questions that guided and shifted our thinking away from the guidebook and towards a decolonial guide to Hawaii. What we realized once we started to work with our contributors is that what they were narrating was decolonial visions for an otherwise Hawaii. And so we have essays, personal reflections, artwork, maps that were created by activists, artists, and academics, as well as communities working to create and critique and dismantle tourism, militarism, settler colonialism in Hawaii, and offer models of how to restore ea. And for us, ea, which is a Hawaiian word, on the screen it reads, ea is based on the experiences of people on the land, relationships forged through the process of remembering and caring for wahipana, storied places. Ea is an active state of being. Ea cannot be achieved or possessed, but it requires constant action day after day, generation after generation. And it's the sense of ea, this the sense that we have to work at it every day for generations in order to create these otherwise futures for all of Hawaii that became the political motivation and the cornerstone of this work. So the book is divided into 4 parts with a very brief conclusion, and we organized each chapter according to a Hawaiian understanding of place and Hawaiian concepts. So it's very much grounded in a kanaka oiwi and an indigenous sensibility and sense of place and our politics. So we begin with wahipana, storied places. We ground it in place. And, these include political art, essays, poetry, biographies. And in each of these, there's a critique of tourism, there's critique of capitalism, of development, of militarism. It's a call for the restoration of land-based practices, of fishing practices, of understanding place in a different kind of way than what is offered through tourism. Part 2 is Hanalima, decolonial representations and projects. Again, this is where we get back to that question, that point about work. This takes effort. It takes work and labor to carve out sovereign spaces away from the tourist gaze, away from tourists themselves, so that Hawaiians, kanaka oiwi, can engage in cultural practices. It's about resistance to tourism, to cruise ship tourism in particular. We have a chapter focusing on Molokai and the way that the community mobilized against the cruise ship tourism that happened on their island, and then created a model by which cruise ships could come to the island, but on the residents' terms and not those of the tourism industry. Part 3 is specifically focusing on tours, huaka'i. Huaka'i is a Hawaiian word that is about intentional touring, intentional journeys for transformation. So they have a politics embedded in them. And here we lead out this section with an essay by Kyle Kajihiro and Terry Keko'olani and their Detour Project, which is specifically about moving people through space, beginning with Hawaiian sovereignty, then critiquing militarization, and then ending on a farm where they are restoring ea through the restoration of food practices. These narrative tours of place are actual tours that folks could read the chapter and move through space. In the business districts of Honolulu, as well as neighborhoods in Honolulu, there's some tours that describe the work that's happening out on West Oahu, as well as decolonial maps. And then finally, we get to part 4, moving beyond the Big 8, moving into the diaspora, moving beyond just our primary 8 islands that comprise our Pai'aina, our archipelago. And here we're thinking about diaspora as an important component of our understandings of Hawaii. We're also talking in that chapter, takes up the question of Indigenous internationalism through the worldwide voyage of the Hokulea and their Malama Honua project, and how Indigenous peoples can restore our political relationships with one another. And then we conclude with the phrase "A'ole ipau," it's not yet finished. Decolonization is a process, just as colonialism was one. And so we have to continue to do this work day after day, generation after generation. This book is intended to inspire rather than to be representative. This is what communities are doing on the ground to, again, create and otherwise possibilities for Hawaii. And this book also inspired the Detours series, which is also with Duke University Press. And the book series emerged organically. Bernadette, my co-editor, and I were approached often by people who were like, how do we do this in our places to celebrate our homelands, our places? And each book is a series. In the series has an editorial team that curates a collection that reflects both the place-based critique of colonialism while also visioning for a decolonial liberatory future. Each editorial team is responsible for operationalizing colonialism, decolonization, or decoloniality, and also visioning those preferred futures for their communities. What does liberation look like for them, and how are activists, artists, and academics doing that work on the ground? We currently have 7 volumes in various stages of development and production from Palestine, Guam, South Korea, Singapore, Okinawa, Puerto Rico, and the Bay Area. And we hope to have our first, the next sets of books out on the shelves really soon. So that's my presentation. Aloha.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting to hear about this. I have one question, and that is, do you see any kind of like, if take for example the concept of aloha, which
Yes.
I think is very global and everyone knows about
Yes.
it. It's about being generous and Hawaii being a welcoming place and all that. Do you sense that the concept itself, from a native point of view or from an indigenous point of view, has lost its significance, its value, due to tourism? Or because there are studies around the world where tourism is kind of devaluing the origin, the authenticity of certain heritage.
Yes.
Heritage markers, or
Absolutely. So yes, in Hawaii and beyond, right? Aloha is a word that we hear everywhere, right? Like and see everywhere. And it's been appropriated to so much beyond its original understanding, right? Like that we have, aloha being associated with, like snowboard shops in Utah, right? At ski resorts, suggests how it's been disconnected from its original meaning and understanding, which really is about reciprocity and relational accountability. If we can think about that term, aloha, the sharing of breath face to face, is about that sharing, that reciprocity. So one of the things that we try to do with Detours is reclaim aloha and situate it within this broader political sort of a broader politics that is about decolonization, while also bringing in another term that we don't often hear in tourism, which is a'ole, no, right? And so here's where we, again, worked very closely with our contributors, because they said to us very loud and clear that they don't want their work to be an open invitation to everyone. And so one of the things we had to do as editors in the introduction is to introduce this idea, this concept of a'ole. When locals say no, it means no. Some of these contributors also said, you cannot come and visit this place. You must be invited. So we've brought back, we now have a'ole and aloha working together in this book. And the essays themselves speak to aloha and a'ole.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's time for our final guest to this panel, to this seminar. I'm very happy to say welcome to Susanna Battelle, who will talk about the right to stay, exploring graffiti and street art as political representations against touristification in Lisbon. Susanna is an auxiliary researcher and lecturer at the Center for Psychological Research and Social Intervention of ISCTE, University Institute of Lisbon. Her research has been trying to understand and improve, through a critical and interdisciplinary approach, the relations between people, territories, and ecosystems based on community engagement and socio-environmental justice. She has published extensively on these topics in journals such as the Journal of Environmental Psychology and the Journal of Community and Applied Social Psychology, and has coordinated and participated in several funded projects such as Just Energy, funded by the Portuguese Science Foundation, particularly focused on promoting socio-environmental justice for the green energy transition. Susanna, welcome to the screen.
Thank you. So hi everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and also for the previous presentations that really will help to contextualize and give the background to my presentation as well. So I think you can see my screen, my presentation. And today I'm going to talk in relation, as I said, to the previous presentations, and particularly about gentrification and mostly touristification in Lisbon, in Portugal, with a focus on street art and graffiti as a means of political participation and representation of these issues in Lisbon. So with this work, what we tried to do was to contribute to the growing activism and research around tourification and its impacts, and particularly in the Southern European context. And of course, there are many factors that were already a bit discussed here today that are similar between Lisbon and other Southern European cities and islands that led to this increase in touristification and the increase of touristification. And of course, much of this process started with the 2008 financial crisis in Portugal, and particularly in Lisbon as well. And this was then, of course, compounded by state policies and even tourism marketing campaigns that stimulated foreign real estate investment, also a non-habitual residence program that was created at the time with these golden visas, so that people with sufficient money could buy these financial citizenships, but actually not live in Lisbon or in Portugal, but they would just have to buy a house for a certain amount of money to be able to get those financial citizenships. And so this was a program that was there for many years, and really contributed also to this process of touristification. And then, of course, the Airbnbization, so to say, of the city, with the expansion of the short-term rental market. And so throughout the years, in the last decade or so, this has led increasingly as well to many forms of protest. And there are here some examples. Some of them have materialized as very large, huge public demonstrations. So probably the largest in recent years in Portugal were related with tourism and, of course, the housing crisis. And in the images above, we can see some of the material impacts as well of tourism and consequences. So, for instance, on the left, this area that used to be just empty for people to walk around, full of tuk-tuks, and in the top right, this very well-known tram in Lisbon. So it's part of the identity of the city. Even in tourism postcards and tourism campaigns. And you can see the huge queue that is there for mostly by tourists to get the tram, when the tram has been historically actually used as a means of transport. And more Especially older residents in the historic neighborhoods of Lisbon miss this type of transport to allow their mobility in the neighborhood. So here, just some examples of the particular consequences of touristification in Lisbon, and also of some examples of collective contestation of and direct contestation to touristification and the related housing crisis in Lisbon as well. So with this project and this research, what we wanted to do was to focus a bit not as much on the psychosocial impacts of touristification, and I work in the psychology department, and so this work departed also from this area, environmental and social. In environmental and social psychology, also in other social sciences, the psychosocial impacts of touristification in terms of both more psychological impacts, but also displacement and related impacts, displaced dispossessions, and so on and so forth, have been more studied in the last year. And in the last years, and we wanted to not only focus on that, but also focus more on precisely these contestations of touristification and its politicization. So what can people do in order to try and contest and call attention to the negative impacts and psychosocial impacts created by touristification? And so what we decided to do was to focus particularly on trying to think of forms of politicization that were happening in the public space, and that discussed and created a space for discussion in the public sphere about these issues. And of course, the protests that I talked about before are an example of that. But we noticed that also more and more we could see graffiti and street art, particularly in the historic and most touristified neighborhoods of Lisbon, so appearing more and more and engaging with the issue of tourism and of the touristification of the city. And so we decided to focus on analyzing graffiti and street art precisely in these most touristified historic neighborhoods of Lisbon. So in particularly in psychology and social psychology, graffiti and street art as political participation has been an idea that has only recently been focused and discussed as such. Even if, of course, we can think of graffiti and street art even historically as one of the main means of precisely politicizing issues, of communicating about issues, and creating and discussing meaning about social issues that is inherently public. And also due to its even more recently, its illegality, and its association precisely with reclaiming the public space, graffiti and street art can be seen as forms of communication that can really give voice to counter-hegemonic ideas, and to really create this dialogue and give voice to marginalized and counter-hegemonic discourses. And we had already, with other colleagues, followed a bit this line of thinking and of research with another project, and the pictures there, the images are from that other project, in which we precisely also traced around Lisbon graffiti and street art that kind of use these intersectional discourses about different political issues that are being discussed in the public sphere here in Lisbon and in Portugal. And for instance, there, those two examples interestingly relate issues of racism with sexual orientation, and also the reclaiming of the public space by people with different sexualities. And the second one as well, interestingly, intersects and relates and puts in dialogue feminist ideas with the Carnation Revolution, the Portuguese Revolution that led to the end of the dictatorship and the beginning of the democratic period in Portugal. So we were very interested in precisely trying to explore this, but for touristification, and to see exactly what would be the role of graffiti and street art in politicizing touristification in Portugal in a time, moreover. So we collected this data and did this study around 2018, 2019, and this was a time in which there was still very much depoliticized, especially in at the governmental level, but also even in the media, of tourism. So tourism was still very much seen as almost inherently positive and good, precisely because it was used to deal with the impact of the economic crisis of 2008, and has been used since then as one of the main economic basis for the growth, or at least the not degrowth, so to say, of the Portuguese economy. And so we focused precisely on trying to understand graffiti and street art were being used to contest this commodification of Lisbon and other cities and places as part of this new liberal capitalist rationality, and discourse. And of course, even if always being careful to also not consider street art and graffiti as necessarily counter-hegemonic, and also recognizing that even as an illegal and normally counter-hegemonic practice, it also has been permitted by certain norms and certain hegemonic ideas, such as heteronormativity and gendered discourses. And so always being careful to also not put it as necessarily only as counter-hegemonic or progressive, so to say, but as this complex, multi-layered political practice that is, of course, also embedded in this neoliberal capitalist regime, so to say, that it also is, in this case, mostly trying to contest and to critique. So, as I suggested already, we then had as a main aim to analyze graffiti and street art as psychosocial processes of interest to understand for contributing to social change and justice in this specific case towards the right to the city, people's rights and communities' rights to the city. And we've collected the data, so we took pictures of the graffiti and street art that were discussing somehow issues related with tourism, with housing, in Lisbon by doing a wandering ethnography through the most touristified neighborhoods in Lisbon. So Alfama, Bairro Alto, Castelo, Madragoa, and Moraria. And then we analyzed the graffiti through a pragmatic discourse analysis. So our aim was to see what the graffiti and the street art were mostly about, and then what they were trying to say. So how were they trying to politicize or not the issue of tourism, and particularly of touristification. And what we saw is that most of the examples that we collected, they were precisely trying to contest tourification at many different levels and scales and in different ways, but always in relation to also, or almost always in relation to also discussing the housing crisis, which was also discussed and projected at different scales and through different dimensions. So now I'm just going to quickly go through some of the examples that we have analyzed and that I think are really interesting to reflect also about these issues and some of the issues that were also already here discussed today. So, for instance, something that was very interesting and transversal to all the analyzed graffiti and street art that we collected was that actually none of them were very parochial, so to say. So they were always related with this issue at the city level, or even at how it's connected to touristification with processes, political, economic processes and policies at national and global levels. And this is an interesting example of how graffiters and street artists, they picked up on even well-known tourism, Lisbon tourism identity symbols, so to say, like this one. So here you can see this boat with the two crows, which is the symbol of the city of Lisbon, that you can see there, that the formal version in the right, and the graffiti on the left. Or what it did was to pick up that very well-known symbol that is all around the city of Lisbon, and to deconstruct it to create this counter-hegemonic narrative that precisely is trying to highlight how that historic identity of the city of Lisbon is being questioned, is leaving with the symbol of the crow, with a suitcase leaving the boat, and with the symbol on the mast, saying for rent. So as if Lisbon is in itself, as a place and as a city with all its identity and history for rent. Another example that is very interesting as well is this graffiti that highlights how the family house, so again, picking up on traditional values, traditional Portuguese, nationalistic even values that are also very present in some, still very present in some of these historic neighborhoods, precisely because they are historic neighborhoods that are often very traditional neighborhoods associated with the fado and with the history of Portugal, and its national identity, and are used, precisely again in tourism campaigns, in postcards, as such. And in this graffiti, people highlight that when the last family house, so this traditional family house, will be transformed for tourists, the neighborhood that you so much love will be nothing else than the empty expression of capital. And then it's signed with the hashtag as expelled from the neighborhood. So it's a very clear message, talking about touristification and its consequences in terms of place displacement and dispossession. But again, interestingly, linking it, with this historical and nationalist even narrative that the government and public policies and tourism campaigns want to maintain and to foster. And really just even highlighting in a very simple way, this creative destruction of capitalism. So capitalism is destructing the issue, that it needs for tourism to continue in this area. So it's destroying supposedly, the very authenticity of these neighborhoods that creates tourism, or that fosters tourism in the first place. Another interesting example that I brought
Susanna,
here today.
Can you please wrap up?
Yeah, of course. So just to show then this example, that it's from a legal town hall owned street art gallery. So just to show as well that more formal institutionalized forms of street art also in Lisbon try to engage with this issue of touristification. And yes, to wrap up, just to highlight that, again, I think these examples and our analysis show that street art and graffiti can bring to the public discussion, and not only for the dwellers of the cities, but also to tourists themselves, this awareness and this reflection about the role of tourism and the role of tourists in a city. Thank you. Sorry for going over time.
Thank you, Susanna. I have one short question to you, and that is, have you seen any examples of, in your research, that street art and graffiti has become commodified for tourist reasons, or commodification of street art? Because I was on fieldwork in Calabria in South Italy in October, where actually in a rural area, street art and graffiti were used in that to attract visitors to this more remote place.
Yes, for sure. So here as well, there has been that discussion, because more and more, even in more peripheric neighborhoods, graffiti and street art are used to create tourism tours, and routes. And so there's that discussion as well, even because moreover there's that layer of being in peripheral neighborhoods, normally with already also marginalized communities and racialized communities that live there. And so there's a bit that tension of on one hand to giving also a sense of an identity, so to say, and place belongingness to the people living in these particular neighborhoods, but then at the same time, at what cost, and being including them also as part of this process of commodification. So So yes, we're having that discussion exactly because that's happening too.
Thank you. Okay, so we have listened to the last panelist, and I would like to raise a cyber applaud to you for your talks. It has been really amazing listening to your research and the case from Gotland. So we now enter into the Q&A session. I hope everyone of our speakers is coming on the screen. Great. Now they are all here. So let me see here now. Okay, we have a question here that is, since tourism is a two-edged sword and sustainable tourism only gives us the precaution, what are your thoughts on regenerative tourism? What are its prospects balancing in the destination?
I mean, I'm happy to start.
Great. Go ahead, Guillaume.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I work mostly with cultural and activism responses, so I am hesitant to offer solutions myself. I tend to focus on diagnosing the problem, though my research is also leaning on that way. I am now working with a colleague in law about the pressures of short-term letting and thinking how to suggest proposals. But returning to the question, I don't know to what extent these social movements I have worked with would consider regenerative tourism as a new label to substitute sustainable tourism that has now been exhausted. So at least in places such as the island of Mallorca, an island inhabited by 1 million inhabitants that receives 16 million tourists annually, without counting all the privileged mobilities such as digital nomads, expatriates, second homeowners, etc. Mostly the solution that social movements tend to put forward is tourism degrowth. There needs to be a clear degrowth of tourism, and something that Pia and Helen were hinting at, which is a different alternatives for locals working industry. So tourism, a lot of this movement says that tourism is a monoculture, and that is very problematic. So I feel at this stage, and that's why I also, not that this is the moment now, but that's why I also feel the term of tourism is relevant, at least in the European cases, because the contradictions of the model of mass tourism have now been brought together with new mobilities, especially in the post-COVID age. The digital world has allowed for completely different types of tourism, etc. So I feel the contradictions of that model are now emerging very clearly. And unless there is a deep change in the model of tourism, it will be very difficult to find the midway term. And I'll stop there.
Eyes on Gotland.
Yes, thank you. We have been listening to our tourist foundation, or what do you say? Yeah, they want to work the regenerative tourism, but when I have listened to this, I understand it should be three legs together to balance, and one leg is the inhabitants, and it's always the lack of the group of inhabitants is very difficult to find, because 60,000 inhabitants have very different ideas of everything, so you can't find that leg actually to put it into the tourist discussion. But what we have here on this island is, my feeling is that everybody is getting more and more poor, because in the end we just are service for the visitors. So we get poorer and poorer and poorer. We can't manage to to buy houses or rent houses, and we don't have any work during winter time because it's closed everywhere because of there is no visitors. So then we have half the inhabitants on the island working in the tourist industry. They don't have any work during the winter, and that impacts on our municipality budget for investing in the inhabitants. So then also this budget for tourism is very big from the municipality. So you take the money from us who lives here to fix roads and boat ramps. For example, we paid 60 million crowns for the ramp from the
boats.
from the boat.
But they shut down the art museum and took the money to build a ramp for the cruises.
So it's a very small budget, and it goes down. The more tourists, the less budget for the inhabitants. It's a very bad idea. We think the regenerative tourism is a very bad idea. It's not possible.
Thank you. I think Kokolane raised your hand. Did you?
Not really. I was just echoing what was already said. In Hawaii, I think that the kinds of limitations that folks have already spoken to are also relevant in Hawaii as well. I think one of the things that at the local level on the ground, the COVID pandemic, when tourism was when the islands were closed to tourism, I think what it invited a lot of organizations to do was to create some alternatives, right? To think about how to feed ourselves without the ships, how to create additional work opportunities, job opportunities that didn't rely on the hotels. So there's a way to think beyond the tourism industry, and there needs to be political will to move beyond the tourism industry, which is, I think, what folks are here talking about. We have a contributor who's now in the state legislature, who is, trying to legislate revisions to development and housing legislation so that folks can afford, residents can afford to live in Hawaii, so that there's fewer people buying second and third homes in Hawaii, houses sitting empty most of the year, right? So the kinds of issues that folks are talking about here. But yeah, it takes a systemic approach, as well as we also need to change our desires as people to want to be serviced by the industries in these places where people go. We need to just not visit them.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next question, and that is, can and how might alliances be formed across territories to mobilize in effective ways? Is this possible? Go ahead.
Thank you. So I think it's quite interesting to think about one of the ideas from industry, think about political space. Do you hear me? No?
It's not very good sound.
Oh, sorry. I will. Well, go ahead with other person maybe, and with other speaker, and I will.
While you're fixing the sound, Susanna perhaps wants to say something.
Yes, I was going to say that I think it's definitely possible to form alliances across territories, and for instance, I think in Southern Europe, and particularly even between Portugal and Spain, that has happened already, and if even with the cultural products, with the Like there's this group, Left Hand Rotation, that has made several documentaries about this issue in Barcelona, also in Lisbon, and I think that's a good way to connect the dots, so to say, and to show that also everything is related precisely with capital and the public policies that want or not to regulate, as was said before as well, the prices for housing, and that also allow or not for these different programs. And I was going to say also in relation to the previous question that I think that's it. It's important also to think so definitely about over tourism and this idea, but also how it's also not only that, but also these new, for instance, digital nomads movements, and also these, as I was saying, for instance, in Portugal, these golden visas to give people financial citizenship, which are kind of other forms of tourism, so to say, but that often are not thought about within tourism as we are discussing it here. So it's important also not to forget these other types of mobility, so to say, that are not tourism per se, but are also contributing to the problems we're discussing here.
Thank you, Susanna. Alejandro.
Okay, I think now is okay.
Better.
Okay. Well, I think it's quite interesting to see. Maybe it's not a casualty that we are almost all of us are living in islands or have lived in islands. So I think because of we have been talking now, also I think it's quite interesting to introduce the concept of what the people of an island perceive, because the islands are quite limited, limited but also open, to some kind of relationships with nature, with other people, with non-human nature. So I think archipelagos have to do a network of people working and connecting to understand what kind of protests and processes are taking place in every island, and to get connected and to make better protest initiatives, not just to protest, but also to think about a new conception of what the people want to do with the island they're living in. So I think it's quite interesting. In the Canary Islands, there's a collective or some collective who are working together in Canarias tiene un límite. Canary Islands have a limit, although I have been talking about Tenerife, this kind of protests and the kind of processes are also taking place in other islands which are also over touristified. So I think it's possible, and I know some networks which are working in the south of Europe, like Retesete, which is a network against touristification in Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. They're doing quite an interesting work. So, and I think it's also to think about what the role of scholars are, because sometimes we just engage with in research and we don't engage what the society needs, And I think it's quite interesting to rethink about that. What is the role of the university and academic in the protest movements, and what should we do with these processes? And also, I don't know exactly in Hawaii. I know in more in the Balearic Islands, in Mallorca, or in Scotland, I don't know neither. But I know that tourism was a big industry and a big issue for many, many decades. And it's quite difficult, to deconstruct its industry. And scholarship have a really important role in this transformation and the deconstruction of what tourism is. It's not just a good issue to transform the society. It could have been in the 60s or the 50s because it was not the main industry. But actually, when we see many islands, we see that these processes have dispossessed the people who used to live there. So networks are working, I think so, but we have to foster them. And we as academics, we have to engage with these kind of networks and to be really critical what tourism means. No?
Thank you, Alejandro. Okay, time. I promised kind of that we would be finished by, I said 6:30. It's 6:30 now, but I have a quite interesting question in the chat that I would like to at least put on the screen. And that is, if touristification is rooted in both coloniality and capitalism, why do most responses focus only on cultural recognition, identity, rather than dismantling the systems that reproduce exploitation? That was a very easy question, I think. So a quick answer from each of you.
I mean, I'm happy to very quickly. I completely agree with the question, and I was hinting at that in my presentation, but I also think it's very important that we take this focus on cultural recognition as identity as the symptom of the problem, in the sense that those local communities, what they experience directly is the transformation to their everyday life through short-term letting, which dismantles the communities, the existing networks, etc. So that's the symptom. And of course, as Alejandro was saying, it is the role of academics to show that those systems need to be dismantled. But the issue is so overwhelming. The impacts of tourism have become so overwhelming at all levels, overcrowding, housing, community identity, etc., that it is very difficult for these communities to understand the very different networks that allow for that.
Thank you. Someone else? Yes, Susanna.
I would agree with that and say that, for instance, in our analysis, we found it quite interesting that actually people recognize that, and even the paradox, and they kind of ironically play with that also as well, with these like identities like the national identity and these symbols of national identity, so they really directly talk to this and recognizing that these are colonial capitalist symbols. But it's just to say, you, like the government that like so much this, you are paradoxically destroying it. But I don't think it's even people themselves that agree that those symbols should be maintained. No, it's just they shouldn't be changed in this way and without the voice of the people and of the communities. No?
Thank you. Anyone else who wants to say something short? Alejandro, short.
Well, I think we have to think cultural as a part of the capitalist process, no? Because when we are talking about capitalism, we have to think about the fetishism process, which is embedded in capitalism. So you have to select one part of the culture to sell it, and the other part will be not more recognized. So it's a part of it. No, maybe here some people put the point on culture because we don't have too much time to talk about every point about capitalism, no? But yeah, it's a part of it.
Thank you. Okolane, Eyes on Gotland, do you want to say something?
Sure, I'll say something quickly, is that Detours has 40 chapters that both critique capitalism, colonialism, and militarism, while also offering alternatives to those frameworks and models by grounding it in indigenous cultural knowledge, practices, and politics. And what Alejandro said was absolutely, the fetishization of some aspects of culture meant that other aspects of culture were completely ignored. And it's those aspects of culture that allow us to have sustainable self-determination in island countries. So, aloha.
Thank you, Kalana. Pia and Helena, do you want to say something as the final wrap up from the panel?
We don't have so much to say about this. We are not. We're trying to dismantling the system here. We are a small place also, so it's easier to meet. To just go to the person who is the problem and talk to him directly instead of doing other things. So I think that's the way to dismantle things.
Yeah, exactly. You have chosen a way which you think is the way forward for your in the context that you live and work within. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to the people who raised questions. Thanks a lot to the panel, and I think it was an amazing discussion, amazing presentations, and I don't know how to wrap it up, but one thing that I think was a shared theme among all the presenters was the issue of reclaiming of agency. And I think that captures a lot of what was said. So with that, I say good luck with future research. I hope ICE on Gotland gain success in their work, and have a good day and have a good evening to all of you. Thanks for being in the YouTube room.